The first 8 verses of chapter 23 are not easy to interpret and contain a few surprises. They are concerned with those who are not to be admitted into the assembly of the Lord, but it is not obvious what this means. Does it mean a literal assembly of people, either at a local level or at the sanctuary? Or does it mean they cannot be part of Israel at all? First on the list is a man whose penis has been cut off or testicles crushed. Again, it is not clear what is meant. Does it mean any eunuch, or only those who have had a pretty terrible accident? Some think it excludes those who self-mutilated themselves in service of another god. There is a similarity here with the requirement to only sacrifice unblemished animals, but those disabled in other ways are not excluded. There is obviously something particularly important about male genitals. Genesis is full of promises to bless Israel with future progeny, and before the patriarchs, Adam and Noah after him, are commanded to fill the earth and subdue it. Increasingly, families is the greatest blessing. Someone who cannot further the line of Israel is perhaps not acceptable, unless, of course, the assembly of the Lord is not the people of Israel, but the regular meetings. In this case, someone like this would have no say in decisions. But worth considering as well is Isaiah 56 verses 4 to 5, where God promises eunuchs who keep his covenant an everlasting name, better than any sons or daughters. The next category only heightens the confusion. The NRSV renders the Hebrew Mamza with those born of an illicit union, but the meaning of the word remains unknown. It could mean something ethnic, that is, no non-Israelite may marry an Israelite woman, or someone born out of wedlock, or something more serious, someone born from an incestuous relationship. If it is this last option, it would have a connection with the Ammonites and Moabites in the next verse, who are also excluded, because they descended from the incestuous line of Lot and his daughters. Deuteronomy does not give that reason, however, and instead supplies 2 others. They did not help Israel in their time of need, and they hired the infamous Balaam to curse them. The detail in verse 5 that God did not heed Balaam and that he turned the curse into a blessing is surprising, because Balaam is portrayed positively in Numbers, at least before the apostasy at Baal Peor, and he did not actually curse Israel, but waited to speak only what God told him to say. The restriction on entering the assembly of the Lord for 10 years really means forever. There are other instances in the Torah when 10 is used figuratively. In Genesis 31:41, Jacob complains to Laban that he changed his wages 10 times. And in Numbers 14:22, God says that the Israelites tested him these 10 times. Again, the meaning is indefinite. It simply means a lot. However, the restrictions on the Edomites and the Egyptians, which are lifted from the 3rd generation, seem literal. They are also surprising, especially in the case of the Egyptians, which are usually mentioned as a conquered foe or the place of slavery. But before the slavery, the Israelites did sojourn there for a time and escape the famine. It seems on this account they can be included. Another striking law in this chapter is that of verses 15 to 16, where an escaped slave is not to be returned to his or her master. This is unique in the ancient Near East. Whether or not this applies to non-Israelite slaves is also unclear. The medieval commentator Rashi thought so. Israelite slaves would have their freedom after 6 years anyway. In chapter 24, we have the law about divorce, which the Pharisees appealed to when discussing it with Jesus. But this law isn't about divorce per se, but about whether the original husband can remarry his original wife. However, the phrase "something objectionable" became, perhaps unsurprisingly, the subject of intense debate amongst the Pharisees. The school of Hillel took it to mean pretty much anything at all, whereas the school of Shammai took it to mean unchastity. The Hebrew phrase has been described as riddle-like, an expression which defies concrete objective definition. One of the words means either nakedness in general or female genitals in particular. It seems likely that something shameful or indecent and sexual is involved. But if adultery was implied by this phrase, the penalty was death, and so there would be no point to this section of the law, which is about remarriage. The phrase remains unclear, but again, it is not the point of the law in these verses. The house of Shammai was surely correct to interpret it as something particularly serious rather than basically anything, and Jesus' opinion was stricter than anyone's. We need only listen to him.